When we speak about the Ahl al Bayt, we are not simply referring to a historical family that lived centuries ago. We are speaking about a living example of what it means to have a heart fully connected to Allah, a life completely shaped by revelation, and a character refined by divine guidance. Their story is not distant from us. Rather, it is meant to be a mirror in which every believer can see their own spiritual potential and their own shortcomings. At the foundation of everything in Islam lies faith iman that is not just spoken by the tongue, but deeply rooted in the heart and reflected in action. The Ahl al Bayt embodied this reality in the most complete way. Their lives were built upon unwavering trust in Allah, even when circumstances around them were filled with difficulty, uncertainty, or grief. What stands out when we reflect on their lives is not the absence of trials, but the presence of extraordinary patience and reliance upon Allah in the midst of those trials. Consider how faith becomes real in moments of ease, but even more importantly, how it becomes tested in moments of hardship. It is in those moments that the truth of a person's belief is revealed. The Ahl al Bayt teach us that true faith is not conditional. It does not depend on comfort, wealth, or recognition. Rather, it remains firm even when everything else seems to fall apart. That is the kind of faith that transforms a person from within. When we reflect on the life of the Prophet Muhammad, we see a life so deeply rooted in remembrance of Allah that every action, every word, and every moment was guided by revelation and consciousness of the divine. His connection with Allah was not occasional, it was constant. And from that same blessed foundation came his household, who learned directly from him not just through words, but through daily living, through shared struggles, and through witnessing the highest level of worship and humility. This is why the Ahl al Bayt are not merely figures of respect. They are models of spiritual excellence. They remind us that closeness to Allah is not achieved through claims, but through consistent sincerity. It is achieved through prayer that is not mechanical, through patience that is not forced, and through gratitude that is not dependent on circumstances. They lived a faith that was active, not passive, a faith that shaped their reactions, their decisions, and even their silence. One of the most powerful lessons they offer us is how to maintain spiritual strength in moments of loss and difficulty. Life inevitably brings moments of grief, moments where answers are not clear and paths are not easy. Yet, within the example of the Ahl al Bayt, we find a response that is deeply rooted in submission to the will of Allah, not a submission of defeat, but a submission of trust, a recognition that Allah's wisdom is always greater than our understanding, even when our hearts struggle to comprehend what we experience. Their lives also teach us that spirituality is not separate from responsibility. It is not isolated in rituals alone. Instead, their faith translated into action, justice, compassion, and care for others. Their relationship with Allah elevated their relationship with people. And this is a critical reminder for all of us today. The stronger our faith becomes, the more responsible we become in how we treat others, how we speak, how we judge, and how we serve. If we look carefully at their example, we realize that spiritual excellence is not reserved for a select few. It is a path open to anyone who sincerely turns to Allah and strives to align their life with divine guidance. The Ahl al Bayt show us that greatness in the sight of Allah is not about status or worldly recognition, but about sincerity of heart, purity of intention, and steadfastness upon truth. And so, when we talk about strengthening our own faith, we are not talking about something abstract. We are talking about building a relationship with Allah that is consistent, patient, and deeply rooted in trust. A relationship where worship is not occasional, where prayer is not rushed, and where the heart is not distracted from its ultimate purpose. This is the foundation upon which everything else stands, because when faith is strong, everything else in life finds direction. And when faith is weak, everything else becomes unstable. And that is the timeless lesson we inherit from them. Return to Allah with sincerity. Hold firmly to faith in every condition, and let your heart find its true peace in remembering Him alone. When we reflect on the Ahl al Bayt, one of the most profound dimensions of their legacy is not only their spiritual devotion, but their unmatched embodiment of character. Islam is not merely a set of beliefs to be affirmed. It is a lived reality that shapes how a person speaks, behaves, and treats others in every circumstance of life. And in the lives of the Ahl al Bayt, we see that Islam was not theoretical. It was practical, visible, and deeply transformative in their conduct. The Prophet Muhammad DFA stands at the center of this moral excellence. His character was described as the Qur'an walking on earth, meaning that every principle revealed by Allah was perfectly reflected in his actions. He was the most truthful, even before prophethood, earning the title of the trustworthy among his people. But what is even more remarkable is how his moral excellence only increased after revelation, to the point that even his enemies could not deny his honesty and integrity. He taught that kindness is not weakness, that forgiveness is not humiliation, and that justice is not selective. This same moral foundation was deeply embedded in his household. When we look at Ali ibn Abi Talib, we see a man known not only for his courage in battle, but for his deep sense of justice and humility. He ruled with a heart that feared accountability before Allah more than the opinions of people. His judgments were not influenced by personal gain, status, or emotion, but by truth and fairness. He demonstrated that leadership in Islam is not privilege, but responsibility, and often a heavy one at that. Similarly, Fatima bint Muhammad DFA represents the highest standard of humility, sincerity, and devotion. Despite being the daughter of the Prophet and belonging to the most honored household, her life was marked by simplicity and selflessness. She did not seek worldly comfort or recognition. Instead, she found fulfillment in worship, service to her family, and patience in hardship. Her character teaches that true nobility is not in material wealth or status, but in the purity of the heart and the sincerity of one's actions. What is striking when we study the Ahl al Bayt is how consistent their moral behavior was in both private and public life. Many people can appear righteous when they are seen by others, but the true test of character is what a person is when no one is watching, and when they are under pressure or injustice. The Ahl al Bayt maintained the same integrity whether they were praised or persecuted, whether they were in positions of authority or in moments of extreme hardship. They taught that honesty is not situational. A believer does not lie when it is convenient, nor does he compromise truth when it becomes difficult. They showed that patience is not passive waiting, but active endurance with dignity. They demonstrated that humility is not thinking less of oneself, but thinking of oneself less, and prioritizing the needs of others over personal desires. One of the most beautiful aspects of their character was their mercy. Even when they had every reason to respond with anger or retaliation, they chose forgiveness when it was within their moral responsibility to do so. This does not mean they ignored injustice, but rather that their response was always guided by wisdom and restraint. They understood that power without mercy leads to tyranny, and mercy without justice leads to chaos. So they balanced both in a way that only true servants of Allah can. Their interactions with people, whether family, companions, or even opponents, were marked by dignity. They did not belittle others, they did not engage in arrogance, and they did not use harshness as a default response. Instead, their speech was measured, their advice was sincere, and their presence was a source of comfort rather than fear. And perhaps what makes their example even more powerful is that they lived in a society filled with challenges, yet they did not allow those challenges to corrupt their morals. They proved that environment does not define character, principles do. Even when surrounded by difficulty, they remained firm upon truth. Today, when we speak about morality, we often reduce it to surface-level behavior. But the Ahl al Bayt remind us that true character is rooted in the heart and expressed consistently in action. It is about being truthful when lying is easy, being just when bias is tempting, and being kind when anger feels justified. And this is the standard they leave for every believer, not perfection, but sincere striving toward excellence in character until the last breath is taken. When we come to the third dimension of the Ahl al Bayt's legacy, we enter a space that is deeply emotional, profoundly powerful, and impossible to separate from the core message of Islam itself. It is the reality of sacrifice, courage, and unwavering steadfastness upon truth. Even when truth becomes the most costly path a person can walk. This is where faith is no longer just belief in the heart or character in daily life, but where it becomes a lived struggle against injustice, oppression, and moral compromise. One of the central lessons that the Ahl al Bayt teach the believer is that truth is not always supported by numbers, power, or popularity. In fact, more often than not, truth stands isolated, tested, and opposed. Yet it is precisely in those moments that the believer's identity is revealed. The question is never simply what is easy or what is beneficial in the short term, but what is right in the sight of Allah, regardless of the consequences. When we reflect upon the life of Husayn ibn Ali, we are not merely recalling a historical tragedy. We are witnessing a defining moment in the moral conscience of the Muslim community. He stood at a time when injustice had become entrenched, when the values of the message of Islam were being distorted, and when silence would have meant acceptance. And yet he chose a path that was not politically safe, not materially beneficial, and not socially comfortable. He chose a path of standing for truth even when it led to immense sacrifice. What makes this moment so powerful is not only the outcome, but the clarity of intention behind it. He did not move for worldly gain, nor for power, nor for recognition. He moved with a conscience fully aware that remaining silent in the face of injustice is itself a form of betrayal to the message brought by the Prophet Muhammad DFA, and so he stood, not because victory was guaranteed, but because truth demanded it. The courage displayed by the Ahl al Bayt is not a courage born of recklessness, but a courage rooted in conviction. There is a profound difference between the two. Recklessness ignores consequences, but conviction understands them and still proceeds because the alternative, compromising truth, is far worse. This is why their sacrifice carries such enduring meaning. It was not driven by emotion alone, but by a deeply principled stance that justice must be upheld, even when the cost is everything. In their example, we learn that dignity in faith sometimes means enduring loss without abandoning principle. It means that a believer does not redefine right and wrong based on pressure, fear, or circumstance. Instead, truth remains fixed even when everything around it shifts. This is a lesson that speaks to every generation, because every generation faces its own forms of injustice, its own pressures to conform, and its own temptations to remain silent when speaking becomes difficult. The Ahl al Bayt also teach us that steadfastness is not only demonstrated in moments of public struggle, but also in personal endurance. It is seen in patience when tested, in restraint when provoked, and in trust when outcomes are uncertain. Their lives were filled with moments where they could have chosen ease over principle, but they consistently chose what pleases Allah over what pleases people. And perhaps one of the most difficult aspects of their example is that they did not allow emotional pain to distort their moral clarity. Even in moments of immense grief, their connection to Allah remained firm. They did not allow suffering to lead them to despair, nor did they allow injustice to lead them to hopelessness. Instead, their response was rooted in trust that Allah's wisdom encompasses all things, even when human understanding falls short. This is where their courage becomes deeply relevant for every believer, because courage in Islam is not only found on the battlefield or in moments of historical significance. It is found in everyday decisions where a person chooses honesty over deception, integrity over compromise, and principle over convenience. It is found in standing firm when society moves in the opposite direction, and in remaining faithful to divine guidance when it becomes unpopular. The legacy of the Ahl al Bayt is therefore not only one of sacrifice, but one of meaning-filled sacrifice. It teaches us that a life aligned with truth is never wasted, even if it is tested, even if it is opposed, and even if it is misunderstood by many. What matters is not how the world measures success, but how Allah measures sincerity. And so, their story remains a call to every believer. Stand firm upon truth, no matter how heavy the cost may become, for it is in that steadfastness that faith reaches its highest expression. When we step back and look at the legacy of the Ahl al Bayt as a whole, we begin to realize that their story is not meant to remain confined within the pages of history. It is not a narrative we simply admire from a distance, nor is it a chapter we emotionally revisit without allowing it to shape who we are today. Rather, their legacy is meant to function as a living guide for the entire Ummah, across every time and place, regardless of culture, background, or circumstance. The message they embody is timeless because it is rooted in principles that do not change with time: justice, compassion, unity, and devotion to Allah. One of the most important lessons we derive from their example is the concept of unity upon truth. The Ahl al Bayt were not symbols of division. They were carriers of a message that called people back to the essence of Islam. And that essence is that all believers are bound together by one faith, one Lord, and one Prophet, Muhammad DFA. In a world where divisions often arise from identity, politics, or interpretation, their example reminds us that the foundation of the Muslim Ummah is not supposed to be fragmentation, but rather a shared commitment to Allah and His guidance. The Ahl al Bayt also teach us that leadership in Islam is not about dominance, status, or control. It is about responsibility, service, and accountability before Allah. True leadership, as reflected in their lives, is measured not by how many people follow you, but by how sincerely you serve those under your care. Whether it was through governance, teaching, or simply guiding individuals in their personal lives, their approach to leadership was always rooted in humility and concern for the well-being of others. They did not seek leadership as an honor, but accepted responsibility as a burden that must be fulfilled with justice and sincerity. And from this, we learn a principle that is desperately needed in every era: that authority without morality becomes corruption, and influence without responsibility becomes harm. The Ahl al Bayt demonstrated that a person's rank before Allah is not determined by worldly position, but by how faithfully they uphold truth when they are in positions of influence. This is a reminder that every individual, regardless of their role in society, carries a form of leadership, whether in their home, workplace, or community, and will be held accountable for how they exercise it. Another timeless lesson from their legacy is the importance of compassion in dealing with people. The world often teaches us to respond to others based on how they treat us, but the Ahl al Bayt taught something far higher: that a believer responds based on what pleases Allah, not on emotional reaction. Their interactions were marked by mercy, even in moments when they had every reason to respond with harshness. They understood that hearts are not changed through cruelty, but through sincerity, patience, and kindness. This compassion extended not only to those who agreed with them, but even to those who opposed them. And that is what makes their example so powerful. It is easy to show kindness to those who support you, but true character is revealed when dealing with opposition. The Ahl al Bayt consistently upheld dignity in their interactions, refusing to descend into injustice even when they themselves were wronged. This teaches us that moral integrity is not conditional. It is a constant standard a believer maintains regardless of circumstances. At the heart of their legacy is also a deep reminder of the purpose of life itself. The Ahl al Bayt lived with a clarity that this world is temporary and that ultimate success lies in the pleasure of Allah alone. This perspective shaped everything about how they lived, how they prioritized their time, and how they responded to both joy and difficulty. They were not deceived by worldly attraction, nor were they broken by worldly loss. Instead, their hearts remained anchored in the certainty that every moment is a step toward the hereafter. This is where their guidance becomes especially relevant for us today. In a time when distractions are many and priorities are often blurred, their example calls us back to clarity. What truly matters is not accumulation of wealth, status, or recognition, but the state of our hearts when we meet Allah. Are we living in a way that reflects sincerity? Are we building our lives on values that will stand on the day when nothing else will matter except deeds? The Ahl al Bayt also remind us that the strength of the Ummah lies not in uniformity of background, but in unity of purpose. Diversity within the Muslim community is not a weakness. It is a sign of the richness of Allah's creation. What matters is not erasing differences, but ensuring that those differences do not lead us away from justice, respect, and shared devotion to Allah. When the Ummah is anchored in these principles, it becomes strong, resilient, and guided. Ultimately, their legacy is a continuous invitation. An invitation to return to sincerity, to uphold justice, to embody compassion, and to live with awareness of the hereafter. It is a reminder that Islam is not only something we believe, but something we live, breathe, and embody in every interaction and decision. And if we truly take their example seriously, it will not only shape our understanding of Islam, but transform the way we live within it.